Really kind of a heavy topic to discuss today. Heavy and sensitive and very dangerous. Anytime you talk about suffering, why bad things happen to good people, how come there's so much injustice in the world, those kind of major philosophical and emotional questions, there's always the danger of the conversation, instead of providing an insight and progress, it should devolve very, very, very quickly. There is a significant problem at the crux of this issue. And put it simply, the problem is that as believers, we believe in God, obviously, but we also believe in a just God. We believe that God operates in justice. We say that in our prayers, and that is what we believe. Thus, when we see so much injustice in the world, it obviously raises a very important question. How could you have a just God, yet so much injustice is present in the world? Now, the fact that there's injustice and the fact that there's pain and suffering is something which is ubiquitous throughout Jewish history. Of course, collectively as a nation, we've experienced more turmoil, more inquisitions and expulsions and exiles and blood libels and Holocaust and persecution and marginalization in every which way, more than any other nation in the history of the world, for sure. So collectively, us as Jews, we feel that this is a very important issue for us as a nation, but even any person, everyone in the world, every person in the world at some point in some capacity is going to face some measure, some degree of challenges, of pain, of loss, of sadness, of tragedy. Thus, the question arises, and a question that we have to grapple with if we're going to take this issue seriously: what's the deal? What's the deal? What's the deal with all this pain and suffering? But, as I said, the one caveat, the one disclaimer is that when we talk about this issue, there's really two issues. And I feel like I'm the only man here in the room, so I have to be on my defenses, There is a philosophical issue, and there's an emotional issue. Okay? So, when someone has something bad happen to him, there's a philosophical question that they should ask, and they're encouraged to ask. And there's also emotional questions that they're bound to ask as well. Which one is a harder question to answer? What do y'all think? Emotional. Much harder to answer that question. And therefore, I will attempt to not answer that question because I don't have a sufficient answer. I was talking to someone recently, and they said, "Hey, I have a nephew, and the nephew is just going through a terrible, terrible illness. They have some sort of terminal cancer. The child's 7 years old, and what do you say?" I said to him, "I have no idea. I'm not equipped. What do you say? What do you say to parents whose child has done nothing wrong and is experiencing such pain?" The emotional question is a question, and it shall remain a question even after tonight's discussion. That being said, the Torah tells us about Abraham. Remember Abraham?
Oh yeah.
We remember him, right? So what happened with Abraham? His wife. What was his wife's name?
Sarah.
That's right. His wife's name was Sarah, and she died. And what happened? What was the aftermath of Sarah's death? Anyone remembers?
Was she super old when she died?
She was super old. But what happened afterwards? Abraham set aside some time to eulogize his wife and to cry and mourn over her.
Shiva.
Exactly. And the question is, wait a minute, Abraham is the paragon of philosophy. Abraham is the founder of the greatest intellectual idea that has changed mankind more than any other idea. And that is the idea of monotheism. Abraham is someone who should be able to treat the pain and suffering of death of his wife cerebrally, intellectually, you would think.
Why?
Well, because he's someone who's dominated by his intelligence. Yet the Torah goes out of its way to tell us that even Abraham, even someone who is so dominated by his intelligence, he treated the issue emotionally as well. Go ahead.
I already have a problem.
Let's go.
Okay, so, why is Abraham dominated by his intelligence? Is the idea of clearly he's a thinker, right? Because he
Absolutely.
The status quo, and he said,
Absolutely.
all this pagan or whatever, not pagan, I don't know.
Yes, pagan world. Yes.
Yeah. So worshiping idols. This makes no sense. There's one God.
Yes.
Okay, I can see how you would say that's an intellectual process.
Yes.
But also, I feel like inherently there's something emotional and spirituality seems inherently tied up in emotion.
Absolutely, but the world was not lacking spirituality at the time. The world was very spiritual. The paganistic rituals were very spiritual. And that's not where his innovation lied. His innovation lied in his, number one, his idea. Number two, in how he debated the idea. Abraham spent his whole life going from town to town and arguing with the, in town square. That's what he did.
So he wasn't denying the emotional.
I'm not saying that. I'm just I was bringing this. This is a side point. My side point is that even Abraham, capable of tremendous intellectual accomplishments, does not ignore the present emotional crises that happened in the wake of tragedy. That's my only point. Mm-hmm. So my point is, yes, go ahead.
Emotional intelligence too.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
It's an intelligent thing to do because if you hold things in for too long, you just
It's exactly, and that's why, by the way, in our religion we have the Shiva. God forbid if someone's a child loses a parent. So what do they do out there in the greater society? What happens when a kid loses a parent? They say, "Oh, let's buy him a PlayStation. Let's get him a Game Boy. Let's give him an iPad. So like he should be able, let's try to cover up that they shouldn't experience the pain." The problem is, like you said, that when there is pain that's dormant and is not addressed, it will eventually resurface and it'll be much worse. Thus, in Judaism, we say we have 7 days of mourning. Like you sit down on the floor and you take on the pain, grab it by the horns. You address it. You don't ignore it, and that is a path towards recovery. So yes, the emotional pain that's experienced in the wake of tragedy is real, and even the Jewish response to that pain is to address it. I have a wonderful quote that I pulled from Facebook. There was a story here. Listen to this. This is a great story. I love this quote. It's kind of long, but I'll read it to you. I just did copy-paste. So there was a terrible tragedy in our community a couple of months back. There was a young boy who from childbirth had a very rare disease called glycogen storage disease, which means his body... Glycogen, thank you. Glycogen storage disease. So his body didn't... I'm sorry, go ahead.
I used to study that kind of stuff.
Right, so his body didn't produce enough protein, whatever. He had to eat food a certain amount of food every 3 hours. He missed it, he was in danger. In danger of losing his life, literally. So every 3 hours, on the button, right? So some kids, they...
Glycogen's a form of sugar.
Sugar, yes.
And so most of us, like when we break down food, like proteins and fats, like we immediately break them down and store them. And if you can't store glycogen, there's no storage for you. It must have been very low weight.
Yes, so anyhow, what happened was that basically it was a miscommunication, and his father and his mother, one of them went out of town, the other one thought he missed a feeding. 3 hours. Kid who had his bar mitzvah a week earlier. Tragedy. And he died. And it was a disaster. It was just
telling me this?
So anyhow, so right after he died, someone posted this on Facebook. Someone who was very involved with the family. And I took it because I think this is a raw emotional response to tragedy. And he's asking questions. And this is, he's asking questions. And this is the question that has to be asked emotionally after tragedy. Are you ready? Let's go. WTF. That's how it starts. WTF. I don't know what that stands for. Okay. WTF does God want from us already? We try to be good Jews, thousands of years in Galus. Galus means exile. You keep taking them away from us. God, you expect us not to question you? Expect us to sit there quietly while you constantly give punishments to the beautiful? There is a lot you have to answer for. I am allowed to be chutzpah just because you created me. There is a lot of injustice in this world. You have such sick perverts, deranged people out there. You keep them alive, but beautiful souls that did nothing wrong. You take them. No explanation. You do as you wish. It is your world. But it's not right to hurt people that way. I'm sorry you call it just. And yes, my eyes may be small, but I also have what's called a heart to know the good should stay, take the evil away. Mendel, that was the name of the boy. Mendel is a light to the world. Mendel was a piece of sugar. Mendel was good to everyone. His parents, grandparents are amazing people. To do this, why are you getting off on it? Do you like to see good people suffer? I am sorry, I always do what you tell me. By the way, there's not a single punctuation mark or anything like that. I'm just putting in the commas and question marks myself. I'm sorry, I always do what you tell me. I always am good, but enough with your anger towards the Jewish people. You have caused us so much heartache. You call us your children, treat us like it. You have punished us enough. Now, like a parent, reward your children. To be like this, whoa, where did this come from? But this is a raw emotional response, and I think that he's asking her a question. But this is not a philosophical debate. This is in the spur of the moment, and this is a very, very hard question to try to answer. What I want to talk about today is some of the classical Jewish responses to the philosophical issue. How is it possible that a just God does injustice? How is that possible? How is that compatible? There is one way, essentially, this contradiction can be reconciled in a few different ways. Someone told me once that one of the local rabbis in town said that when asked the question of where was God in the Holocaust, he said, well, God wasn't there. That's my response as well. That's a way to try to avoid the problems. But then you run into a bigger philosophical problem. What do you mean? How could God doesn't take days off? So, assuming God is there, what's going on? How do we understand it? So the Talmud spends a lot of time and effort to try to unravel and untangle this important question. Thus, I wanted to examine some of the sources. There's more sources that are left out, because I found some very interesting patterns that I think are, like I said, number one, interesting, but also number two, very insightful as to some of the or the kind of the direction that is taken by the traditional Jewish sources in this issue, but also it's going to underscore, I think, the problem that we're going to experience to try to accept it. So we'll have the answer, but we'll also have the answer as to why it's difficult for us to have the answer.
Can I ask a
Yes, go ahead.
question?
Yes.
Why is it that we have this idea of a just God?
Okay, that's a good question. Because the Christians have the idea of God being multiple parts. And then there's the good, and there's the evil, and the Satan, that's a certain divine element that is independent. But Jewish philosophy, Jewish theology, talks always about a just God, like we have on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, we're going to read it in a couple of weeks, and in a couple of weeks, we're going to read it in Exodus, where God tells Moses the 13 attributes of mercy. Do you remember that? In the aftermath of the golden calf, Kel Rachum V'Chanun, we say, God is merciful, God is benevolent. The Jewish God is always portrayed as, not always portrayed, but essentially portrayed as being just, being fair, being incapable of being swayed. That's the idea. So that's the definition. Yeah, like I said, it's a preliminary question. I think the Christians probably have less of a problem with this question because they're not dealing with the same absolute just God that we have.
But I still feel like there's this, and this, I just noticed there sort of this comes up here in Judaism. We do so often refer to like the righteous and the wicked.
But that's not God.
That's
That's
interesting
not God.
in and of itself that you said that Hashem can't be swayed because Moses swayed him on the mountain.
Okay. Well, through prayer, you're saying. When I meant Hashem can't be swayed, it means he doesn't have like emotions. He's not fickle. That's what I meant. Of course, prayer can make an impact. Prayer can change reality. Prayer could, Sarah gets, Rebecca gets pregnant, due to prayer in Genesis. So yes, what I meant was not that God can't be swayed, but that God does not have the emotions that make unpredictable, irrational, or random decisions. So it's not random. It's calculated. Maybe calculated is a better question. How could injustice happen when there's a calculated God? That's probably a better question.
It was calculated for Hashem to want to kill the entire Hebrew race after the golden cow.
That's what it seems like. And then, or if forget about what God wanted to do. We see lots and lots of genocide in human history, and that's a question, and that's a legitimate question. I'm not going to try to answer that question here sitting. It's not a question that you try to answer just in one sitting. Yeah. It's a complex issue, but not only the idea of the Hebrews dying, but the reality. And even one person dying. The scale doesn't really matter. This is an important point, by the way. Once you're dealing with the core philosophical issue that injustice ought not to happen, it doesn't matter what the scale is. It doesn't matter if it's 1 million people dying or if it's one person dying or one person essentially stubbing their toe. It's the same question at the core. For us, it looks different, But for essentially at the root of the philosophical problem, the question would apply regardless of the scale of the pain or the tragedy, the suffering. Regardless of this, why is there injustice? I once heard someone saying very crudely, by the way, this is not my position on the issue, but I heard this guy saying, listen, the question of why bad things happen to good people, essentially, is the same question whether someone stubs their toe or the Holocaust. It's a very crude way to say something, and it's obviously, someone else said that, don't look at me like that. Don't kill the messenger. But it's obviously it's a very crude way to say it, but to a certain degree, he's right. At the core of this philosophical problem, the scale of the injustice doesn't matter. Okay, so that's what we're going to try to do, guys. What do y'all say? You see, I have never seen a more eager group. What do you say? Let's go. We dig into source number 1.
Yeah.
Let's go. Okay, this is from the Talmud in Menachos. Yeah, Menachos. What does Menachos mean? Anyone knows what Menachos mean? We have a Hebrew speaker here. What does mincha mean? Do you speak Hebrew? No? You speak a little Hebrew?
I was just born in Israel.
He's born in Israel. You should... Okay.
I know there's mincha and mari, but I don't remember.
Mincha. Okay, so mincha...
There's like a group of people.
A mincha is a kind of offering that they used to do in the temple.
Oh, sacrificial.
It wasn't a sacrifice. It was an offering of a flour offering.
Can I just ask you, why did you think I speak Hebrew?
I knew you were born in Israel. I figured, I don't know. You don't speak any Hebrew?
No.
Klum?
I know like
Psat?
a few. Yeah.
Psat.
Yes, very little.
Dana, some Hebrew?
I'm from New York. How do you know?
I was from New York.
I don't know. He's from New York.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just kidding. I'm not trying to pressure you. Isabel, anything? Little Hebrew? Oh.
Oh, wow. My
Okay,
God.
so a mincha.
Wasn't born there, but I did live there when I was tiny. Very good pronunciation.
So a mincha is a flour offering from the temple. So it's like flour and oil, whatever. So the book that talks about the Talmud is called Menachos. And in the middle, in 29b, there's a very fascinating narrative, what happened with Moses when he ascended to heaven, that we read actually in last week's Parsha, during the national revelation of Mount Sinai. Everyone's familiar with Mount Sinai experience, Ten Commandments. Moses goes up, doesn't come down for 40 days and 40 nights. And the Talmud recounts a dialogue that he had with the Almighty. So Moses ascends to heaven. He finds the Almighty. By the way, this is my translation. I apologize. I know I made a few mistakes. I read it over. I'm like, I made a few mistakes in writing. So we'll just fix those. Moses ascends to heaven. He finds the Almighty sitting and tying crowns atop letters. If you open a Torah scroll, you'll find that the words, that the letters Shin, Tet, Nun, and Zayin, Gimel, and Tet, they have little crowns on top of them. Everyone familiar with that? So Moses goes and sees the Almighty putting crowns on top of letters, and he says to them, what's going on? Why do you need to do that? Who is obstructing your way, Moses says? Like, what prevents you? Like, why do you have the need to kind of make these little colorings on top of the letters? So God responds, there's a man who will be in the future after several generations, and his name is Akiva ben Yosef, Akiva the son of Yosef, who will derive piles and piles of laws from every little tick of the letters. And therefore, to accommodate him, I'm making these crowns top the letters. So Moses says to God, show him to me. I want to see him. I want to see him. I want to see this Rabbi Akiva, this great Rabbi Akiva. Let me see him. So God responds, go back, and he went, and suddenly Moses is apparated, he is transplanted into the room, the lecture hall of Rabbi Akiva, and he's sitting there at the end behind 8 rows of students, and Rabbi Akiva is lecturing, and he does not understand a word that he's saying. And he says the law, and Moses doesn't understand. He says another law, Moses doesn't understand. Until finally, and Moses is all depressed, finally Rabbi Akiva arrives at a certain matter, and his students say, wait a minute, where's the source of this matter? And Rabbi Akiva responds, it is a law of Moses to Moses from Sinai. Halacha leMoshe miSinai, which means it's a law to Moses from Sinai. Moses hears that, and Moses is happy. And Moses goes back to God, and he tells God and says, Almighty Master of the world, you have a man, I took out the word have. You have a man such as this, and you give the Torah via me. Moses says to God, why are you giving the Torah through me? Give it to Rabbi Akiva. God says to him, silence, so it was deemed in my mind. God doesn't really give him a sufficient answer. Again, Moses asked another question. Master of the world, you showed me his Torah, now show me his reward. He says, go back, and he went and he saw that they were flaying his skin with combs. He said to God, Master of the world, this is the Torah and this is the reward? Is it fear? Look what happened to the great Rabbi Akiva, and he's being punished so terribly. God responded, silence, so it was deemed in my mind. So that is the Talmud. Now, what's important to note is that every little sentence in the Talmud is analyzed by all the commentators. What it means, 8 rows. What does it mean, silence? Don't ask questions. So it aroused. So it came up in my mind. All these things are discussed now. But at the core of this dialogue is really 2 things. Moses asked God, "You showed me Rabbi Akiva's Torah. Show me his reward." And what does God show him? His suffering, his pain, his punishment. Right? Rabbi Akiva lived in the times of Hadrian, the Emperor Hadrian. And the Hadrianic persecutions, the Emperor Hadrian was perhaps more, his mistreatment of the Jews perhaps superseded that of all the villains in Jewish history. He commanded, for example, no anyone studies Torah publicly will get executed. Any woman who has her son circumcised, the woman and the child will be tied. The child will be tied around her neck and they'll be shoved off cliffs. Terrible, terrible stuff that happened during that time. That is actually a time, just a little bit of history here. I'm speaking a little quickly, I apologize. I'm speaking to that because I want to get it all done. I don't want to take you guys over time. So that is during the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt. If you know a little bit about the history of Israel, Jewish history, or Roman history, Roman Empire history, during the 500 years of Roman dominion over basically all the civilized world, you know that only once were the Romans kicked out of land and a native indigenous people established sovereignty. That happened in the year 132 under the leadership of a fellow by the name of Shimon Bar Kokhba, who, according to most historians, started a revolt, the Bar Kokhba revolt, in response to Hadrian, the Emperor Hadrian's marginalization of the Jewish people at that time. So from the year 132 to 135, they established sovereignty over Israel, the Jews did, and they even minted coins. We have till this day, we have coins that have pictures of Bar Kokhba, and in fact, the Israeli coinage that we have today, they have these pictures on them that were just directly taken off the coins that they found from Bar Kokhba. Is that a cool little tidbit? Anyhow, afterwards, after the rebellion was quelled in the year 135, Hadrian began a systematic attempt to disassemble the Jewish nation. And what he did was he started at the top. He took the Jewish leadership and publicly, viciously executed all the great rabbis at the time. One of them was the famous Rabbi Akiva, who had his skin flayed. That's why he died. A really terrible, horrible, gruesome way to go. Really bad. So Moses asked God, where is Rabbi Akiva's reward? And what does he see? He sees Rabbi Akiva being flayed. And the obvious question is, wait a minute. We asked for a reward, not punishment. What did you show us? You showed us punishment. What's going on? Doesn't make any sense.
Could reward be interpreted as consequence?
Well, the reward is certainly positive. Like the question Moses asked, you showed me his Torah. Let's see the reward for the Torah. And he sees he's being punished. What's going on? And question number 2, I think that we have to ask upon reading this Talmud is, if you look at the next question that Moses asks, he says, this is the Torah, this is the reward? And what does God respond? Quiet, silence. This is the way I think. So it was deemed in my mind.
They were threatened by what he was accomplishing, so they killed him off. So he succeeded to get through to people. That's what God was saying.
Oh, maybe you're saying that his reward was that he was a martyr and he had a place in Jewish history.
But I thought it was against Judaism to be a martyr.
Well, it's against Judaism to try to become a martyr, but we have the laws of Kiddush Hashem, of dying for the sake of heaven, where we have the 3 cardinal sins that we have to give up our lives and not transgress, and they are, number 1, murder. If someone says, "Hey, you take this gun and shoot your friend," right? If you don't do it, I'm going to put you down. Right? What are you supposed to do? Bite the bullet. Number 1. Number 2, adultery. Right? We say if someone says, "How will commit adultery?" It's one of the things you have to give up your life not to transgress. And lastly is idolatry. Those are the 3 big ones in Jewish law. So we do have the concept of martyrdom, and in fact, the martyrs are considered in very high regard. Someone who gives up their life for the sake of heaven is someone who gave up all, sacrificed everything for what they believe. So I like that idea. I didn't even think about that. That maybe Rabbi Akiva's reward was the fact that he is forever ensconced in Jewish immortality as a martyr. That's very clever. I didn't think of that. That's his reward. It's still problematic because it's still not reward.
Reward, but yeah.
Maybe. It's a good question.
Got through to it.
It's a good point. Clever. Very clever. Thank you. But question number 2, I think, very, very, very important and crucial to our discussion. Moses asked God a fundamental question. The same question that us today, 2015 in Houston, potentially should ask. Why do bad things happen to good people? Rabbi Akiva, clearly a good person. This is the famous Rabbi Akiva. He was the leader of the people at the time, the leader of the people when they were the most vulnerable. A mere 50, 60 years after the destruction of the temple and the slaughter of millions of Jews on the hands of the Romans, he was at the forefront of the effort to rehabilitate a broken nation, to rebuild from the ashes. That's who he was. Great Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students, even though he started off his life as an ignoramus. He only started learning Hebrew. In fact, at the age of 40, he couldn't read Hebrew. Gives us all hope. He started at nothing, yet he became so great. So he was clearly a good person, and he was punished, or he experienced pain at a very high degree. So Moses asked him, "Wait a minute, this is the Torah, and this is the and this is the reward." And what did God respond? Quiet, silence, don't ask questions. So it was what kind of answer is that? What kind of answer is that? Moses asked a legitimate question. Give him a legitimate response. That's the source number 1. Let's move on to source number 2. And this is also from the Talmud, and this is from the tractate Brachos. The Talmud is comprised of how many books? Anyone knows? Give me a guess. Random guess, just first number.
5, 8, 10.
Any other guesses? Just throw out a number from 0 to 63. That's the number.
63?
63. It's enormous.
Right now.
Yeah. So the 63 books in the Talmud, the very first one of them is called, there's an order, 1 to 63. The very first one of them, that's right, this is the complete works of the Talmud. Yeah, it's It's a copious, voluminous amount of. I appreciate that. Thank you. So the very first one of them is the book. The very first one of them is called brachos, and the word bracha means blessing, like bruchim habayim, blessing unto those who come. And it talks about blessings. We know that there's in Jewish law there's lots of blessings before you eat food, after you eat food, when you see a rainbow, when you hear thunder, etc., etc. Very, very detailed. All the laws of Jewish blessing. In the book, we find on page 7a once again a dialogue. This is source number 2 on your sheets. We find a dialogue between Moses and the Almighty. It says as follows: Rabbi Yochanan said the name of Rabbi Yossi. 3 things Moses asked the Almighty, and He gave him. There was 3 times that Moses asked a question of the Almighty, and the Almighty responded. And I just cut out some of the. I just got to our point that I wanted to bring. He asked to know the ways of God, and He gave him. As Scripture states, inform me of your ways. In Exodus chapter 13, I believe it's verse either 13 or 14, I don't remember. One of those 2. It says, Moses asked God, Hode'eni nosarchecha, let me know your ways. Inform me of your ways. What did he ask? What ways did Moses want to know? Moses said to God, this is what he wanted to know. Why is there a righteous person, and it is good for him? A righteous person, and it is bad for him? A wicked person, and it is good for him? A wicked person, and it is bad for him? Essentially, Moses is asking the same question. The same question that he asked previously in the form of Rabbi Akiva, he asks again here a little bit more broadly. Number 1, why is it some righteous people and they have it good, but then there's some righteous people and they have it bad? Bad things happen to good people. He also asked in the converse, how come bad people, there's some bad people that it's good for them, and some bad people that's indeed bad for them? So it's kind of more of an expanded question, but it seems like he's asking the same question again, essentially. And now, what does God tell them? Right? How does God respond to this? Does God say, silence, hush, don't ask questions? Or does God give him an answer? God gives him an answer. What does God say this time? So God responded, a righteous person, and it is good for him. That's a completely righteous person. A righteous person, and it is bad for him. That's a partially righteous person. A wicked person, and it is good for him. A partially wicked person. A wicked person, and it is bad for him. A completely, that should say wicked. I apologize, there's a mistake. A completely wicked person. Thus, God gives them an answer. When you see a righteous person and that's good for them, it means they're completely righteous, right? Not having any negative, nothing bad to them. Then the righteous person is good for them. If you see a righteous person that's bad for them, our question, bad things happen to good people, they're not really 100% good. They have a little smidgen of they're only partially righteous. But they have other things which are other misdeeds that they have to atone for. And therefore, they have to receive punishment. So they have to receive pain. They have to receive suffering.
That doesn't make sense.
Why not?
Because they're making little children suffer too.
We'll get to children in a second. That's a good question.
This implies a level of blame.
Because these kids, they're...
That's a very good question.
They haven't developed enough to be good or bad.
That's right. Kids is a different discussion. Let's see if we can finish this, and we'll get to kids. And that's a very good question. But let's try to evaluate the source material on its own merit. I agree with your question. It's a legitimate question. I don't believe that we're talking about children in this context.
Yeah, just like talking about in general.
Yeah, we're talking about people in general. So let's try to understand what the source, what is the position before you give me. I see some skepticism here in the crowd.
What does it mean? It is good for them. Like
Means,
Things are going well.
yeah, good things are happening to them.
There's good karma.
Things are working out for them. No pain, no suffering. Good things happen to good people. So that's someone who's completely righteous. Bad things happen to good people. It's someone who's only partially righteous. Now, why would someone who is partially righteous, why would they have bad things happen to them? So this is explained in source number 3. Once again, it's back to Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva, I don't want to go through the whole source because I don't want to run out of time. I want to get to our final point. But Rabbi Akiva is going to visit his teacher, and his teacher is really going through a really painful illness. And Rabbi Akiva starts laughing when he hears about the illness. And all of his friends say, wait a minute, why are you laughing? You see your teacher there who's twisting and squirming in pain, and why are you laughing? It doesn't seem like it's something funny at all. So he says, all the time that I saw our teacher's wine not ferment, his flax not smitten, and his oil not spoil, I eat. All the time I saw that our teacher had everything going for him, it was all good, I was worried. I said, perhaps, God forbid, our teacher received his reward in this world. Now that I see him in pain, I'm happy. So what this is really opening up another element, and that is that according to Jewish philosophy, this world that we see here today on planet Earth as humans comprised of a soul and a body is not the only thing we have. We believe in the afterlife. Afterlife has lots of, the word has lots of meaning behind it. But the idea of our actions having eternal consequence is an idea that the Talmud clearly believes in very strongly. And in fact, it's part and parcel of Jewish philosophy, that the Almighty makes people accountable for their misdeeds. The Almighty is fair to the degree where Hitler and Mother Teresa don't have the same status now. Everyone has to pay for their actions, and they're held accountable for their actions, and conversely, people receive what they're due for their positive actions. Therefore, says Rabbi Akiva, when I see our teacher suffering, I know that they are paying for their misdeeds. He is paying for his misdeeds in this world. Now, why would you want to pay for your misdeeds in this world? Because the exchange rate is very favorable. If I told you, hey, you got a driving ticket, and you have to pay 100, but you can pay either pesos or dollars. What do you rather? You rather pay those pesos, right? Right. You want to pay 100 rupees or $100? Take the rupees, right? That's like 4 cents. Right? Getting payment, everything in the next world is magnified. Therefore, if someone has to get pain, has to get punished, has to be accountable for even slight misdeeds, way better off getting it in this world. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva is so delighted. Look, I'm so happy. I can't be happier. I'm laughing. I'm falling off my face with laughter. Why? Because I see my Rebbe, my teacher, suffering. Why? Because now I know that his status in the world to come will be not uninfringed and uninhibited and not lacking anything. So this is the basic idea. The basic idea is when someone is completely righteous, without a single fault, without a single misdeed, without a single negative character, completely, perfectly good, they have a good in this world and next world. But if someone's partially righteous, now partially righteous can mean even someone who is as righteous as the great Rebbe Eliezer, the teacher of Rabbi Akiva. But if you have even a little bit, right, then you're only partially righteous. Not completely. If you're not 100%, it's not complete, right? Anything less than 100% is not 100%, so it's partial. So if you're 99.99% righteous and the tiny little bit, 0.001% wicked, you're going to have to pay for that. You want to pay in pesos, you want to pay in dollars. You want to pay in rupees, you want to pay in dollars. You want to pay...
That could be why he was born in the fire, so he paid it next.
Oh, we'll get to it. We'll bring it all for a circle. Oh, that's exactly where we're going here.
Okay.
Would you rather pay in shekels or in British pounds, right? You want to make sure that you do not extinguish or that you get your punishment in this world and not in the next world. That's the idea, what the Talmud is trying to convey. And here's where it gets interesting. Because go ahead. Oh, maybe. Let's stop for a second here. Let's go back to our original source. And I'm going through the material a little fast because I don't want to go over time. Let's go back to our original source. Moses asked the Almighty, you showed me Rabbi Akiva. You showed me his Torah. Show me his reward. What does he show him? Pain and suffering. Wait a minute. I asked for reward. Perhaps what the Talmud is really saying and what God is trying to tell Moses, you should know that at the deepest level, the way I see the world, so to speak, God says, where's Rabbi Akiva's reward? The greatest reward that he could possibly have is to take the exchange rate, to pay the fine in pesos. That's the greatest reward. And you look at it and you say, wait a minute, this is suffering. This is not reward. Yes, it is suffering. But to get the reward here guarantees that in the real eternal world, there's nothing lacking. Number one. Number two, I see skepticism. Every time you say this, you see skepticism. Wait a minute, Rabbi Walby, are you trying to tell me that there's no greater reward in the world than to have your skin flayed? I'm skeptical. I'm dubious. And you know what? So am I. And you know what? So is Moses. What does Moses say? This is the Torah and this is the reward? Almighty God, how can this be reward? His skin's being flayed. How can this be reward? What does God tell him? Silence. This is the way my mind deemed. This is the way I think. God's telling him, Moses, you're a great guy. The greatest man that ever lived was Moses. Even Moses, even you, will not fully understand this. For us as humans, it's very hard for us to think the way God thinks. God is entirely spiritual. We're a mix, right? We're predominantly physical. We have a spiritual element, but we're predominantly physical. Why? Because our body overrides our soul almost every single time. We think very geocentrically, if you will. We think in a physical way. Thus, for someone to tell us about this other world, yes, it's a nice idea. But for us, what's tangible, what's real? What we see, what we touch, what we encounter in this world. Even Moses says, no, Moses, even you, for you to understand this is the way I think God tells him. In my view, the greatest reward possible is to get your... But you, even Moses, you're not going to understand this. This is the way my mind works, not yours. Right? Thus, if we have a hard time accepting it, we're in good company. Because we're with Moses in our lack of understanding this completely. Now, let's move over to source number 2. What happened to source number 2? Source number 2. We just did source number 1 again, now source number 2. Moses asked God the same question. Now, we know, like in the military, all you need to do is ask the question once. You don't need to ask it twice. And we also know historically, if you look at the beginning of source number 1, it says when Moses ascended to heaven. This is during the Mount Sinai experience. It's time-stamped. You know exactly when it happened. Source number 2, that is from Exodus 33. That is merely 1 month after Moses ascended to heaven. So if you ask God a question, and God gave you whatever answer he told you, does it make sense 1 month later to ask the same question? It doesn't. Huh?
You rephrased.
He did. Okay, but essentially it's the same question. Why would Moses ask the same question?
He wasn't satisfied with the answer.
Okay, maybe. But let's look at this from a deeper level.
Getting a different answer, getting different.
This is fascinating.
Context.
This is fascinating. When I hit this, like I was like, whoa! I hate dirt. This is fascinating. What happened to Moses when he went down from heaven? Sorry, I pulled out my noose. What happened to Moses when he went down from heaven? If he went down from the mountain, what did he see?
First time or the second time?
First time.
Golden goat.
Golden calf. What happens? God says, "I'm destroying the people," like you mentioned. That's right. God says, "I'm destroying the people." Moses intercedes upon their behalf. He goes up again. He comes back down again. What happened that time?
Certain people died.
Well, before that, Moses' face was glowing. We know Moses had to wear a mask from the time of the Sinai till he died 40 years later. Moses wore a mask. Why? Because his face was shining like the sun. The misnomer that Jews have horns comes from the verse in Exodus chapter 34 that says, Ki karan or panav. And if you know a little Hebrew, you know the word karen means a horn. And it's spelled the same way as Quran, not Quran, not like the book, but Quran means it illuminated. Moses' face was illuminated. And in fact, the Talmud says, Pnei Moshe, the face of Moshe was like the face of the sun. Moses, in the interim, had achieved a level in spiritual accomplishment that was never achieved before that and never achieved afterwards. The sun, we know that the sun is always an expression used for the soul. Why? Because if you try to look at the sun, what happens? Try staring at the sun tomorrow afternoon. Not tomorrow afternoon, might be a little cloudy. You can't look at it. Why? Because it has a spiritual element that it's beyond us. We're physical, we cannot perceive it. Moses, his soul was shining forth. He had achieved a level where his physicality was dimmed, so to speak, and his soul was the predominant element in his life. Thus, Moses now, even though it's only a month after he asked the question, he says, you know what? God told me last time, don't ask this question. You don't understand it. It's beyond you. You're physical. You don't understand. This is the way I think. Now Moses says, wait a minute. It's a month later. I'm at a much higher spiritual level. Now I'm spiritual first. My face is glowing. This is a level of spirituality untreaded upon by any human since creation. And since then, no one has yet reached that height. Thus Moses says, maybe now I will understand it. And he asks the question again. And then God tells him, now I'll tell you the answer. The idea being, these sources tell us not only what the answer is to this problem, and that is the way God sees it. The greatest reward someone could possibly have in the world is to have punishment and have pain and have suffering in the most terrible, tragic way. That's the way God sees it. Why? Because that's going to mitigate their pain that they're going to experience in the next world. We'll get to your question about kids in a second. I can see that's the obvious next question. But for us, it's very, very hard for us to be at harmony with that issue. Right? It's not going to be easy for us. And even Moses, at a certain point in his life, God told him, you want to really understand this issue? You can't. Silence. This is the way God thinks. It was deemed in my mind. This is the way I see it. You're almost precluded from fully understanding it. But the idea, we understand it, but we also understand why we're going to be limited in our complete integration of this idea into our consciousness. Moving on to your question. What do you do about kids? The best answer that I could possibly give is to say I don't know. However, I'm going to tell you an idea that maybe will provide some illumination. Perhaps. There was my paternal grandfather, I don't want to go over time here, I'm very conscious about that, I apologize. Paternal grandfather was a great rabbi who lived in Israel. His name was Shlomo. Or Rabbi Shlomo, they Google him. Very influential. Oh, well, yes. Anyhow, so he died in 2005, 10 years ago. And I have maybe 50 cousins that are also his grandchildren. Fairly large family. I have a cousin who lives in Israel who had a child a mere 6 months after my grandfather died. And of course, if you have a son after your esteemed, illustrious grandfather just passed away, you're going to want to name him after him, you would think, right? So they named the child Shlomo. Wonderful, they're delighted, they're excited, they're fired up. And unfortunately, 3 months later, child died of sudden infant death syndrome, crib death. Disaster, tragedy. What do you say? It's just terrible, right? My uncle, who lives in New York, wrote them a letter, a consolation letter. And he wrote as follows. He said that my grandfather, the deceased, the elder deceased, he grew up in a family where the Torah ideals were not necessarily the most important thing in their lives. My great grandfather, Rabbi Wolbe's father, was a professor of a university, and he wrote books, and he was a kind of like an intellectual in academia, but he wasn't so into Judaism. That was in Germany in the early part of the 20th century, basically the extreme reform, which kind of rejected many of the basic principles of Judaism, rejected Israel, very anti-Zionist, just basically all the tenets of Judaism were just not held of very high esteem, and that's where he grew up. So my uncle wrote to them, to the parents of the deceased baby, that tragedy. He wrote to them that when the grandfather's soul ascended to heaven, they said, "Listen, the soul's almost perfect. He's such a great scholar, tremendous character, tremendous action. He's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful person. Very, very influential. Wrote many books in Torah. Almost perfect. But there was one thing lacking, and that is that his as a child, he didn't merit to have an upbringing and to be born into a family where the Torah values were held at a very high esteem. Thus, the soul had one little slight flaw, and therefore the soul had to be sent down again and to find a family that was going to fix that flaw. And my uncle wrote to them, says, "This soul of your child was the same soul of the deceased grandfather. And you guys completed the circle. You filled that one void that he had." Where he got this information from, I have no idea. And maybe, who knows if it's true or not.
So he believes in reincarnation.
Yeah, reincarnation is a very, very... The idea of a soul being able to be reinserted into some new body is an idea that goes very, very far back in Jewish philosophy. The idea of perpetual reincarnation, the Hindu idea is not a Jewish idea. But the idea of a soul needing a second go-round to fit something, that's...
Like 3 times.
I haven't seen that number as a limitation, but that's an idea that's been around for a long, long time in Jewish history.
Was that supposed to make the parents feel better?
So, who knows? That was the idea, but the most painful suffering is where there's no meaning for it. You don't feel like you gain. It's just amorphous. I think that's the word used for it. Where it's just
That gives them something to hold on to.
yes. Well, when you feel that there was a purpose and something was achieved, who knows if he's right or if he's wrong? I don't know. I think he is right. But the idea of a soul needing just something to fulfill its purpose, and then once its purpose is fulfilled, somewhat like the idea of an angel, where it's just there for one purpose, and after that, if there's no purpose, there's no angel. So if there's no purpose, then we believe that we're here on a mission. Thus, if the mission has been accomplished, then that's it. We don't need to be here anymore. So thus, we don't look at it as punishment or pain, just as mission accomplished. And sometimes, we look at children who unfortunately die in their childhood as being souls that needed just something to be done to them, and we don't look at that so much as suffering. We look at that more as it being a just one final go round to check off a box that was unchecked in a previous iteration of that soul. Yes, this is a big idea, but that's just quickly. So to recap and encapsulate the ideas. Number one, the idea is that there's multiple questions that need to be addressed. Number one, there's the emotional question, like Abraham, and like the fellow that we read his pull quote from Facebook. That's a very, very important question, and that will remain a question. That's a very hard question to try to attempt to grapple with. Philosophically, there are many, many, many Jewish sources that spend a lot of time talking about it, underscoring the importance of this issue. We took 3 of them over here, and we see like a progression that happens to Moses in his trying to understand this question. He asks the question multiple times. First time, he's not satisfied. God tells him, "You don't understand it." A little bit later, he says, "Well, maybe now I understand it," and he gets somewhat of an answer. We see Rabbi Akiva, who seems to be at the core of this. Remember, Rabbi Akiva appears in 2 of the sources, which is also very interesting. There's some sort of link here between Moses and Rabbi Akiva. There's something very deep going on here beneath the surface. But Rabbi Akiva kind of lived this idea. To him, when he saw his Rebbe, he saw his teacher suffering, what did he start doing? Laughing. This is delightful. This is the idea. But it's an idea that Moses himself had a hard time with. If we feel like we have a hard time with it, we're in good company, like I said. That's the idea, and I think it's. I like it as food for thought because when in Jewish philosophy, when we're faced with these existential dilemmas, it doesn't seem like the attitude, the approach is to kind of sweep it under the rug and try to, beat around the bush and try to avoid the issue. We address it and we give real philosophical responses to very, very grave issues. That's the response, but I think that for us, if we feel like this is an attitude that's very difficult for us to incorporate into our Weltanschauung, we should know that we're in, Weltanschauung means worldview or perspective. We know that it doesn't, we're in good company because it seems like Moses himself had a hard time and God had to tell him, listen, this is the way God thinks. And the idea being in God's mind, if we were to isolate our spiritual perspective and ask that question, why do bad things happen to good people? Why do we face punishment in this world? The real answer is because it's a reward. Because we'd rather pay our fine in pesos versus dollars. That's the idea, guys. Thank you all for coming. It was lovely. And thank you, Rabbi Johnny, who's not even here, but he invited me to take over for him. And I apologize for the late invitation. I'm happy everyone came. It was a delight to meet you, Isabel. Hope you come to future classes and discussions.
You better. Gosh, it's your brain.
But once again, this is a very weighty discussion, and I'm very happy that we did it without,
Yes.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Tons of fun, everyone. Tons of fun.